Welcome to Downtown Sports. My name is Downtown Stephen Brown, and in today's video, guys, I want to talk about some players who I think the Toronto Maple Leafs should consider trading for, who found themselves on Frank Seravalli's latest trade board. And one of these guys are even a defenseman who I think could really help the Maple Leafs with what they struggled with so far defensively, and he shouldn't cost them an arm and a leg. That's my little teaser for the video here. And before we jump into things, I'm trying to hit 8,000 subscribers by my birthday in January. If you're new here and you've enjoyed the video by the end of it, it would mean a lot to me if you would consider subscribing. The first player that I want to talk about is a defenseman, but not the defenseman that I teased off the top of the video. Jacob Chychrun, for all of the trade talks that have been going on for a number of years now involving him, is a defenseman worth talking about. But at the same time, the asking price is rumored to be 2 first-round picks, or the equivalent of 2 first-round picks, plus something else. Jacob Chychrun is a guy who can play both the left and the right side. He's currently 24 years old. He'll be 25 at the end of this season, and he's signed for 2 more years after this one at a very friendly $4.6 million cap hit. Well, if we're looking at their blue line, Jake Muzzin and TJ Brodie are getting up there in age at 32 and 33 years old. Muzzin may not even play again. But those two guys are both under contract for the next 2 seasons. And then there's kind of a wide opening on the Maple Leafs blue line where they're going to either need young guys like Rasmus Sandin and Timo Meier to fill those spots in their top 4, or they're going to need to go out and trade for somebody or sign somebody in free agency. With Chychrun being 24, turning 25 this year, he's still in the prime of his career or approaching it. And because he signed for 2 more seasons after this one, that would mean that he would be under contract at $4.6 million when the Maple Leafs need to re-sign Austin Matthews and William Nylander, which, to have a defenseman like him at such a friendly number, would be a huge asset for the team. He's dealt with some injuries over the last couple of seasons, but when healthy, he's probably been one of the better defensemen around the NHL in terms of his offensive abilities and his defensive ones as well, playing on a very bad Arizona Coyotes team. If you don't think he's worth this price tag because of his injury history, I mean, you're not wrong to be worried about that, but at the same time, there's some perspective to add to that. And somebody on Twitter mentioned the other day, I'll flash their account up on the screen for a second there, that Jacob Chychrun's played for a bad NHL team basically his entire career. The Coyotes have been pretty much eliminated from the playoff picture either at or before Christmas time almost every year that he's played for them. If you're Jacob Chychrun and you're 22, 23, 24 years old, and you're dealing with some injuries, you're banged up, you got some bumps and bruises, are you coming back at anything less than 100%? The Coyotes themselves would probably say, dude, this doesn't make sense. You're not going to make a difference here. Take the extra week or 2 to come back at 100%. I mean, the Leafs, the year that they finished last in the NHL and drafted Austin Matthews, I believe James Van Riemsdyk broke his foot in like January or February, and the Leafs are like, yeah, we know this is like a 6-week recovery time, but we're just going to shut you down for the remainder of the season because we really want the number 1 overall pick. And obviously, it's speculative. We don't know if that's the case or not. But at the same time, guys are injury prone until they're just not, right? The first couple of years of his career, Austin Matthews was being called injury prone. And over the last 3 or 4 seasons, he's missed about a dozen or so games from wrist surgery, all at the beginning of last year. I don't think anybody's calling him injury prone at this point. If you're wondering what the Maple Leafs would have to give up to acquire Jacob Chychrun, I can't see the Coyotes not asking for one of at least Rasmus Sandin, Timo Meier, or Matthew Knies. And those are the 3 guys that I just don't want to trade right now. Pretty much everything else is on the table in terms of picks and prospects. The interesting situation that the Leafs are in right now is that Morgan Rielly is going to be out for the next 4 to 6 weeks or so. Rasmus Sandin and Timo Meier are going to get an extended look in their top 4. And so far in the 3 games that they've played there, they've looked pretty damn good. And if they're able to continue doing this over the next 4 or 5 weeks or so, my willingness to include one of them in a trade for Jacob Chychrun goes down significantly. Now, obviously in 2 or 3 weeks from now, we'll have a larger sample to see how these players are performing. If it's kind of leveling off or they're not doing so well, maybe I'd be more willing at that point. But right now, as it's going, Rasmus Sandin and Timo Meier look like they are taking the next steps in their development. The next player that I wanted to mention here is San Jose Sharks forward Timo Meier. He's going to be an RFA at the end of this season, but because his salary for this year is $10 million, that means the qualifying offer that the Sharks would have to submit to him, or any team would have to submit to him to retain his rights, would be a 1-year, $10 million deal. Over the last couple of seasons, we've seen a number of teams work around very large qualifying offers like that to get players under like a multi-year deal. But for the San Jose Sharks, who have a lot of money committed for a very long time to a number of players on their roster who are playing for them or not playing for them still, they may not be able to. And that would make Timo Meier available in a trade. If the Sharks are motivated to move him at this year's deadline or even before then because they want to give themselves the best odds at drafting Connor Bedard this year, I mean, Timo Meier's a guy who's hurting their chances probably. He scored a hat trick the other day in a losing effort, mind you, 8-5 to the Seattle Kraken. But this guy's got like 12 goals in 22 or 23 games. He's about a point per game player. He's very good. He's a bigger forward at over 6 feet and over 200 pounds. He'll lay the bodies. Not too great defensively, but he's a very, very good offensive player. I would happily, as long as it's not one of Rasmus Sandin, Timothy Liljegren, or Matthew Nyes, I'd happily pay a first and one or two of the Maple Leafs' best prospects. Because he's going to be an RFA at the end of this season, but the Maple Leafs could very well just treat him as a UFA. What's to stop them from shilling out first and two of their best prospects and then flipping him at this year's draft and getting some of those assets back? I know this isn't a video game and the San Jose Sharks aren't stupid. They know that other teams can do that, but you got to walk the line, right? I would at least pick up the phone. This is a very interesting situation. Another very intriguing name on Seravalli's list is forward Anthony Duclair, who plays on the Florida Panthers and has been recovering from off-season surgery. Now, Duclair is signed for another season after this one, but it's just at $3 million. It's a very affordable number. But for the Panthers, they currently do not have enough cap space to activate him off of LTIR once he's healthy. They've been playing all season. If you want to know what cap hell looks like, it's not what the Maple Leafs have gone through this year. It's what the Panthers have gone through. They've been just barely able to afford a 20-man roster, so no bench players, no extra players, and they've played with 19 men a couple of times this year. Sergei Bobrovsky has been an absolute nightmare, and he's making $10 million to be their backup goalie, basically. Spencer Knight goes from making entry-level money to almost $4.5 million next season. They've got $6.5 million tied up this season in Keith Yandle and Scott Darling, who are analysts on NHL broadcasts this year. They don't really have anybody else who they can move off of their roster. They've already promised Patrick Hornqvist that they won't trade him. Who else would they move or send down or get rid of to be able to afford Anthony Duclair? They can't. They may be in a situation where they may have to give away this player. Duclair scored a career-high 31 goals last season for the Panthers in the regular season, and he's been awesome offensively over the last couple of seasons, either in Ottawa or Florida. Now, he's not the greatest defensive player either, but like we said, if you're getting him for almost next to nothing, he serves his purpose for the $3 million that he makes or so. He's going to score goals, and that's something that the Maple Leafs could use more of. The Panthers also made Duclair a healthy scratch ahead of Game 6 of their playoff series against the Capitals last year. So not only is this a guy who they may not be able to afford to activate off of LTIR, but this is also maybe a guy who's maybe fallen out of favor with the organization, which would only bring the cost to acquire him down. And the Panthers aren't stupid, right? They're going to give themselves as much time as possible to make this decision on this player before they give him away for basically nothing, which means that they'll more than likely send him to the AHL on an LTIR conditioning stint for a couple of weeks after he returns from his injury, and that would buy them some more time. And if another player in that extra time that they've bought themselves ends up getting hurt and they make at or around or even more than $3 million, then they'd be able to afford to activate Anthony Duclair and push that decision down the road. The Maple Leafs did this last year, and they did it for like 4 or 5 months. And if you're wondering if the Florida Panthers would even consider trading Duclair to the Maple Leafs, I mean, stranger things have happened in the past. I mean, the LA Kings a number of years ago really didn't want Martin Jones in the Pacific Division, so they traded him to Boston, but then Boston flipped him to San Jose, which is hilarious. So anything is on the table. And if the Florida Panthers really are stuck and they can't get around it, beggars can't be choosers, right? The last player on Frank Seravalli's list that I want to talk about is Washington Capitals right-handed defenseman Nick Jensen. And I want to read a bit of the paragraph that Frank wrote about him here. The math is beginning to get daunting for the Capitals, who have been shellacked by injuries. They need to go something like 35, 18, and 9 over their final 62 games to hit 96 points, the traditional barrier to entry for the playoffs. John Carlson is the only defenseman locked in next season. There are 16 pending free agents and a lot of cap space to work with. Jensen will no doubt be in demand as a quality defender who withstands forechecking pressure well. The Toronto Maple Leafs have currently given up the second most defensive zone giveaways in the entire NHL this season, and they've given up the most defensive zone turnovers in the entire NHL this season. I know that a lot of people want to see them go out and acquire a big, bruising defenseman that could be tough to play against in front of their own net and just really put guys in line. But I don't think that's what this team needs. If you're looking for that type of guy, I think they already have something like that in Jordy Ben, who's currently out with an injury right now. But I mean, who is healthy on the Toronto Maple Leafs' blue line? They need somebody who could get the puck out of their own zone. They need somebody who could be a reliable puck mover. They need somebody who could limit the turnovers in their own end. And Nick Jensen is really great at doing that. Nick Jensen, a right-handed shooting defenseman who's 6'1" and just over 200 pounds. He's playing close to 21 minutes a night for the Capitals in heavy defensive zone minutes. I mean, he's also got 10 points in 22 games to go with it if you really care about the points. If we're looking at his Andy and Rono player card here, the possession exits almost break the chart. I'm not a fan of rooting against other teams to play bad, but if it's going to mean that the Capitals are going to make him available in a trade, I hope they lose every single night and Nick Jensen continues to play well, because this is exactly the type of player that the Maple Leafs would need in their lineup. Like I said, I know a lot of you want to see them go out there and acquire the big bruising defenseman. They need to limit those turnovers. For as good as they have been defensively this season, and they have been good, we looked over the numbers earlier, those turnovers are a problem. And Nick Jensen is a guy who can help with that. And he only makes $2.5 million, which would put them in a position to be able to afford both an upgrade at the defensive position by acquiring him and leave some room to go out there and get a forward as well. This is just a no-brainer. Kyle, pick up the phone. But that's going to be it for the video, guys. Make sure to like the video if you did like it and subscribe for more, because more is always on the way. Like I said earlier in the video, some of the names that we talked about here are a little bit more obvious than others, but I really think that those last three names that we talked about in Timo Meier, Nick Jensen, and Anthony Duclair, very, very intriguing situations that they're in with their teams. And I would be very, very interested in all three of those guys.